everyone can be an artist, right? I mean, somebody's got to pick up trash for a living. Tennis is the same. Even after years of lessons, hours of practice, thousands spent on training, there are still some professional players that hit the ball so strangely, it leaves us wondering, how did these guys go pro? Between outrageous serving motions, painful grips,
he rips the forehand,
and crazy body movements, it's a miracle some of these players haven't injured themselves. Join us as we take a look back at some of the most unorthodox, unique, and just plain shitty shots in tennis. This is the best of 5 different strokes. Handful of players on tour that have such a distinctive style of shot making that you can't help but wonder how they manage to compete with the top players. But shocking results have shown that players with unusual games, or dare we mention disgusting strokes, drive the top players crazy.
When a person has a really awkward stroke, and the thing you think as a watcher is, how could you manufacture that over and over and over the same way?
There are players who are just crafty with their crappy, ugly, disgusting shots.
Start with my backhand and say, where did that come from? And it's ugly, but it's effective is the way I like to phrase it. It's ugly, but effective.
If you're a great athlete and you practice 5 or 6 hours a day for 10 or 15 years, you can get pretty good at something that's even maybe a little more difficult, a little unorthodox.
Originality needs to be celebrated, and I think I give my father so much credit for there that he said, if my daughter feels this is the way she wants to hit her forehand, having 2 hands on the racket, then that's how she'll hit it.
Yeah, just wonder about, like, how does an athlete go through thousands of hours of playing, lots of coaches watching, you know, and never really get to the point of, we could smooth this thing out a little bit for you, you know.
Let's see which players embrace the different and ugly stroke storm and yet still manage to have a pro career. There are some guys who smoke the competition. There are others that always get smoked. And then there's this guy who just liked to smoke. At number 5 is the chain-smoking German Karsten Brasch, who had one wacky serve.
Karsten Brasch's serve, I can't quite figure out how he does it. He walks into it. It's very awkward to watch. It's even more awkward to try and return.
Karsten Brasch, I think he did a little disco dance before he got up to the baseline there.
So biomechanically, it may not even look like it's able to function, but he must have had an unbelievable hand-eye coordination to be able to get that ball over the net.
The form of the serve at the end, it made some sense because he was able to give all kind of spin to the ball.
He twisted himself like a pretzel in his serving motion, and I thought all his bones would come apart. He would have to be put together again by a plastic surgeon or something.
He didn't just have one stroke that was funky. Every stroke he had was funky Medina. He had the hacksaw, backhand, chip, bizarre forehand, quadruple hitch on the serve. No 2 shots were the same coming off his racket. The ball would nerf in there. It was like a knuckleball coming off Phil Necro's hands.
It reminds me of how I heard Charles Barkley's golf swing described, which is it looks like he's trying to kill a cockroach.
And he had these funky little glasses, and he would pull it back, and then he would smoke 2 packs of Marlboro Reds. Big fan of you, Karsten Brasch.
Karsten's strokes weren't the only thing in bad form. He had a changeover smoking habit that left him asking the umpire for a light.
The ATP said, you can't do that. It says it's not in the rule book, you can't do it. And finally they convinced him that he would be heavily fined if he continued smoking during a match.
I mean, if we have to tell you that you can't smoke during the match, like, something is supremely wrong with you. I mean, like, these are not things that you should have to, like, institute laws.
And finally, at the '98 Australian Open, the Williams sisters were blowing smoke that they could beat any 200-ranked male. Well, Karsten happened to overhear them, and with a cigarette hanging from his 203 ranked lips, he slaughtered both of them faster than you can light a match.
Karsten is, I think, more known for his fact that he beat the Williams sisters in Australia one time, that he said, I'll take on the girls and show that the top 200 player can beat the best players in the world.
The women's game is a lot more straightforward. Karsten Brosch is everything but straightforward tennis.
Coming up, awful tosses leading to losses.
And that second serve, that's why she gets into trouble.
What's up, tennis junkies? Welcome back to some nasty, different, ugly, and sometimes just crazy strokes. Before we get back to the countdown, let's take a look at two brothers who make tennis look like a freak show.
The Batterstone brothers are very interesting. It starts with the racket, and then they serve like they're playing volleyball, and it's like watching Karch Karai in his prime, or any of those great jump servers.
He has this jump serve that is unbelievable. He throws the ball up with his right hand, holding the racket with his left hand. So picture this. So he throws it up like really high, and then he switches hands, jumps all the way up, and just cracks the biggest serve I've ever seen.
It is incredible. First of all, the guy must have a 40-inch vertical as high as he jumps. But he jumps and he serves. It's incredible that he gets away with it, but they've done pretty well in doubles.
It's Karch Karai serving with this crazy twisted racket, and it looks like, again, it looks like the kind of demonstration you would see next to, the guy who can juggle.
This racket thing, I'm not sure how they came up with that idea.
Looks like it would just get in the way and just be weird.
Surprised that this has been deemed legal, but God bless them.
We've seen some wild serving motions, but next on our countdown is a woman who tossed the ball so dreadfully that there was a chance it would pop through the TV and smack you in the face. Coming in at number 4 is Elena Dementieva and her awful second serve.
Elena Dementieva's serve was so bad in its heyday that it was painful to watch. Players would actually shy away from looking at the TV because they're so superstitious. You would think that maybe the yips were contagious.
She was throwing the ball up in Texas and chased it all the way to Florida. I mean, that toss got way out there.
I think what happened with Elena was that she had a shoulder injury. And when she came back from her shoulder injury, her toss moved way to the right. And so when you serve well, you want to have like your hip come over hip and back shoulder come over front shoulder. But she would toss so far to the side, so she would only come around the ball. And then she'd get nervous, so she'd come around but kind of stop and kind of push it. So the ball would have nothing on it. It would go like 60, 70 miles an hour, like barely over the net.
Darts with a double fault, that's not going to help her confidence.
In 2004, her tenacity and ground game got her to the French and U.S. Open finals. Unfortunately for her, though, her serve had more faults than Gary Coleman's career.
Well, it's her first serve and her second serve. You've got 2 chances to put the ball on the court. And she just can't seem to get out of that little yippy mode.
I think it was a couple U.S. Opens ago where it was really in bad shape, where she'd throw it to the right, and all the players would stand so far right, like the slice serve was going to come into your forehand every time, and you knew it.
The way she served, it also gave her a certain position of her body in the court that she would have to change. And that it took a lot longer than it normally would if you just have the small technical adjustment. But because she came totally different into the court, it also gave her a different rhythm on the next ball.
And a double fault. This second serve was just, I felt so bad because she's such a great player.
She corrected it, and she's got some great wheels. I mean, she moves the ball around the court well. But that toss was really something.
I think she's consistently working on her serve, and now that she won the Olympics, obviously she may also believe that she can win a Grand Slam.
And you see that her toss has moved back to 12 o'clock, and now she's hip over hip, shoulder over shoulder, and she's serving well, so it's good to see because she's a great player.
It's really impressive that Dementieva has gotten that serve under control. Her mother, her coach, Harold Salmon, who's been working with her a lot, that's not just a technical breakdown, it was a mental breakdown. So they've worked on both, and it's really impressive that she's shown the perseverance to become such a top player.
Coming up, another serve that doesn't make sense, and a grip so bizarre, you'd think you were upside down. Welcome back to the best of 5 different strokes. Before getting back to the countdown, let's look at a player who is usually an honorable mention in all aspects of her career, except the backhand.
I mean, the weirdest stroke and an impossible shot to hit was François Deur from France. You look at the way that she hit the ball. She had her finger out in front and her thumb over here and her wrist way out in front. She got down with her knees and kind of went like this. Her head was kind of the same level as where she hit the ball. If I were to hit the ball probably once the way that she did with her finger out like this, I think my wrist would break. And the fact that she played an entire career, and that actually was her best shot, her most accurate shot of her game, is fascinating.
You've seen some very batty serves, and I bet you're thinking, how could it get any worse? Up next is a grinder who made it to the top 10 with mental toughness, one mean backhand, and a surprisingly appalling serve. Coming in at number 3 is Jay Berger and his ultra-abbreviated serve.
Well, I remember about Jay Berger. He fight for everything. I mean, he definitely didn't have the nicest strokes of anybody, but he actually worked in your brain, and he did good with that.
He was a grinder, sort of stiff, but a great competitor.
Hard worker, a guy that would make his opponents really suffer on the court, and his technique may not have been the best, but his mind was very strong.
He used to stress preparation, giving yourself the best opportunity to be successful.
Even though he reached the top 10, every time Jay pulled his arm up to serve, tennis fans would cringe and turn away in disgust.
Jay Berger had one of the most bizarre service motions I've ever seen, and it was actually due to a shoulder injury. And he would pull his racket back, never used to teach players to scratch their back. Jay never did that. He basically started his service motion right here and came down and whipped down. And amazingly, he spawned an entire generation of Argentine players.
My serve started when I was 16 years old. I pulled my chest muscle and started serving in the half motion, and kind of came to the realization that, you know what, I didn't serve that well the other way, and I serve a lot better this way.
His serve definitely was something that distracted even the opponents, and it gave them a different thing to look at.
What he did was, I think, showed a lot of people that serving is not that hard. You can simplify the motion.
Served from up here, you know, just to use that big Prince Pro with the nylon string, and it was sort of a guy that you could see playing at a park.
In the professional top 10 player, that was unusual, but we cannot complain because it was a top 10 player.
I think if you don't have a great service motion, it's a great way to serve it. And like I tell people, I was way ahead of my time, but just didn't know it.
It's a real credit to his timing, his athleticism, his competitive spirit, but his strokes, ugly.
Okay, now that we've gotten all the food out of your stomachs, let's move on from these foul serves. Next up, a guy who gripped the racket like he was trying to beat Barry Bonds' home run record. Only he didn't use steroids. Coming in at number 2 is Alberto Berasategui, and the most extreme grip the game has ever seen.
I don't know which side of the racket he's playing with. Evidently, it's the same side. I mean, I'd break my arm if I held my forehand grip like that.
He just sort of shifted himself around and turned his racket in the most bizarre fashion. And for whatever reason, he was incredibly successful at it, and particularly on clay. I don't think anybody today could replicate that shot, even if they tried.
He had an extreme forehand, and with the same face, he was hitting backhands too. So basically, it's you can't teach that. You can't.
Whoosh. The racket ends up back behind him.
Berasategui was a master on clay, reaching the French Open finals in 1994 and getting as high in the rankings as 7. Because of his wacky grip, clay was the only surface he could play on.
There's only one Berasategui, and the guy was a master on clay. But you put him on grass or a hard court, and that grip's going to cause some problems.
Berasategui with a full swing.
He has one of the most extreme grips in the history of tennis, and basically he was able to flip that racket and hit on both sides.
He would use the same side of the racket for the forehand and the backhand. The Australians used to call that the upside down backhand.
He almost shows the other side of the racket before he hits the ball.
His game came straight out of some sort of masochistic movie. I mean, that forehand, it was just so contorted. His backhand was horrendous. You could go to a park and find guys that had better backhands than he did.
Playing like that, it's supposed to be almost impossible with this extreme grip and play with the same face of the racket, forward and backhand. He proved that with this grip you can go in the final French Open.
But it's an ugly shot. It ought to be banned.
Coming up, our number one different stroke, who had more than a few tricks up his sleeve. Welcome back to the best of 5 different strokes. Before we reveal our number one, here's an honorable mention who took a cue from someone dear to her heart.
Marion Bartoli's a good one because she plays quirkily, 2 hands on both sides, and she takes the ball very early.
Playing two-handed on both sides. When I started, I was playing no more than forehand. But I'm lefty. Normally I'm writing with the left hand, but my dad is righty and he teach me tennis with the right hand because it was easier for him to teach me like that, so I'm kind of ambidextrous.
I don't know if we played more than once or twice, but I know I lost a tough match to Marion, and for me it's funny to see playing somebody that grew up watching me and suddenly was beating me. It was just really great how high her ranking has gone up.
They always tried to change me when I was a little kid because it was not like technically sense for them.
Her father is sort of, they call him the French Richard Williams. She'll get done playing and go right to the practice courts, and suddenly she's on her belly slithering around balls, and she's jumping on balls, and she's hitting these crazy angles that you'd never hit in an actual match, and he has all of these drills and all of these methods, and she goes right along with it. And again, Wimbledon finalist. I mean, it's easy to sort of roll your eyes and laugh, but clearly something's working.
Bartoli's eccentric style takes after the man who graces us next on the countdown. Coming in at number one is the magician himself, Fabrice Santoro, and all of his strokes.
He's a pain in the butt to play. He will just massage you and just cut you and nick you, and before you know it, you're just bleeding to death. He just moves the ball around, and you never know what's going to come off his racket.
Santoro was first called the magician by Pete Sampras, who was astounded by what he did. He just is marvelous to watch because he's putting so much spin on he can play on any surface.
It's more of a unique sort of way to look at his strokes. He's got the slice forehand, he's got a good backhand, serves okay, but more awkward than ugly.
He's probably the most mimicked player in the locker room. Everyone has their own sort of two-handed slice forehand mimic of Fabrice.
Nobody hits a forehand the way that he hits it. His backhand, he has the two-handed backhand, but then he has a two-handed forehand, keeps the same grip, so he has the crossover grip here. But most of the time, people start low and they go high. He goes up high right away. And so he has this kind of slice with a crossover grip that he can disguise so well.
There's coaches around the world killing themselves because they're trying to teach their kids how to hit the ball properly, a forehand and a backhand, and the kid goes, what about him?
Everything is natural. Nobody learned me how to play this way. Every strength shot I hit is something I do since I'm 7, 8 years old. So for me it's normal to play this way, and it's the only thing I can do.
I mean, you cannot teach someone how to hit that kind of half volley.
His style of chip and charge, wacky ball slices, unannounced drop shots, and Speedy Gonzalez-like movement have been known to drive players to the psych ward. Safin once said, seeing your name next to his was like being told you're going to die.
It was the consummate nightmare to play. When you saw his name in the draw, you realized that you better be taking your Xanax that day because you were going to in for some rough, emotional consequences.
He is a master of spins. He hits the ball up, he uses underspin as well as anybody.
Just so fun to watch. And anyone who's played tennis, I think, has a particular appreciation for him just because you realize how absurd it is what he's trying to do and how exceptional it is when he pulls it off.
The guy just had more get-out-of-jail-free cards during a match than anyone probably in the history of the game.
His bizarre, outlandish, and downright fun movement of the ball guaranteed an exciting match for fans that usually ended with a hug at the net.
Fabrice Santoro was maddening because you couldn't tell the direction with which he was hitting the ball. He's so sinewy on the court, and yet he can flip off a shot with angles from any which way, two hands off both sides.
Isn't it a pleasure to see a guy play the game so differently? I mean, those strokes that he has and that slice forehand bother so many of his competitors. He's way into his 30s, and he's still out there and bothering his opponents.
Santoro's longevity has led him to play more Grand Slam singles tournaments than any other male player. Even though Santoro graciously retired at the 2009 U.S. Open, his game and style will always be remembered, along with being our different strokes #1.
And never get bored of seeing him apply his craft.
We will never see another tennis player play the game like Fabrice Santoro, and I personally absolutely love to watch him.
I mean, he always does drop shots, or I actually tried his slice, the two-hand slice. Sometimes it goes, but sometimes it's not so good. So I need to ask him how he does that.
It works for Fabrice. He's got the flair to pull it off.
Two of us were in the top 50. I was one of them. Jimmy Connors was the other with two-handed backhands. We're the only two. And I feel like if I had known that this was the future, I'd have had a lot more confidence in the shot, and I wouldn't have thought of myself as a freak.